In the summer of 1941, long before American soldiers set foot in North Africa or France, the United States Army faced a quiet crisis that almost no one outside the Ordnance Department understood. The Army was expanding faster than at any point in its history. Thousands of new recruits poured into training camps every week. Motor pools, artillery battalions, engineer companies, communication detachments, and medical units all grew at a pace that left planners scrambling. These men were not frontline infantry, yet every one of them still needed a weapon. And the Army did not have one that truly fit their needs. The standard service rifle, the M1 Garand, was a powerful and reliable weapon, but it was heavy and long. For a rifleman on the line, it was perfect. For the men who spent their days driving trucks, repairing tanks, building bridges, laying communication wire, or carrying stretchers, it was a burden. Officers complained that their support troops moved slower during marches because the Garand hung awkwardly off their shoulders. Tank crews argued they could barely climb in and out of their turrets with it. Engineers carrying explosives found the rifle constantly snagged on their gear. And medics said bluntly that they could not treat wounded men quickly while wrestling a 9.5-pound rifle. The alternative was the Thompson submachine gun, admired for its firepower but cursed for its weight. The Thompson weighed more than the Garand and cost so much that the Army could never issue it broadly. Pistols offered portability but almost no useful range. They were emergency weapons, not battlefield tools. The Army needed something in between, something light and fast to handle, but more capable than a sidearm. A weapon with enough accuracy to hit targets out to 200 yards, but small enough that a Jeep driver or a radio operator could carry it without thought. This need turned into an urgent request that came down from the Chief of Infantry to the Ordnance Department. Design a weapon lighter than the Garand, simpler than the Thompson, and cheaper than both. Make it compact enough for support troops, but useful enough that a soldier suddenly ambushed on a road or in a village could defend himself. Make it fast-firing, easy to handle, and intuitive for young men barely months removed from civilian life. The request was bold, almost unrealistic. Weapons design rarely produced perfect compromises. A light rifle might lack power. A compact weapon might lose accuracy. A cheap weapon might sacrifice reliability. Yet the Army insisted. The weapon would be issued not to hundreds or thousands, but to hundreds of thousands. A single new rifle could reshape the way the entire United States military fought in the coming war. It had to exist. Several gun companies attempted prototypes, but none impressed the testers at Aberdeen Proving Ground. Most designs jammed. Others were too heavy. Many lacked accuracy. As deadlines approached, the Ordnance Department turned to a company known more for sporting rifles than military contracts: Winchester. Their first attempts were rough and unremarkable, but inside their factory was a quiet engineer named William Romer and a talented mechanic named Ralph Clarkson, both inspired by an idea from an unlikely figure. That figure was David Marshall Williams, a man whose life story sounded more like legend than engineering biography. Williams had designed a revolutionary short-stroke gas piston during his time in prison, a mechanism so efficient that it caught the attention of firearms engineers across the country. Winchester hired him, and his system became the beating heart of what would become the M1 Carbine. In May 1941, the Winchester team began assembling a prototype under extraordinary time pressure. They worked day and night in a race measured not in months, but in days. Engineers slept on benches. Designers redrew blueprints over cold cups of coffee. The workshop smelled of machine oil, hot metal, and tension. Every man in that room knew the stakes. If they failed, the Army would abandon the carbine concept entirely. If they succeeded, the weapon would arm a nation. What emerged from that frantic burst of creativity was unlike anything the Army expected. It was a small rifle, barely over 5 pounds, slim in the hand and quick to shoulder. It used a 15-round detachable magazine. It fired a mid-powered cartridge, more accurate than a pistol, but lighter than rifle ammunition. It balanced effortlessly. Testers could fire it one-handed if needed. It was half the weight of the Garand and far easier to control under stress. When the prototype was presented at Aberdeen, the officers were skeptical at first. The wooden stock looked too thin, the barrel too light. The weapon seemed like a toy next to the heavy steel rifles of the era. But the first test shot stunned everyone. The little rifle bucked lightly and returned to aim almost instantly. The testers fired again and again. Every shot landed cleanly, every reload was smooth, and every malfunction that plagued earlier competitors was absent. Aberdeen wrote a simple line in its evaluation that would later become famous. "This is the weapon we asked for." Within months, the rifle was approved as the United States Carbine Caliber 30 M1. Production contracts went out to some of the largest industrial firms in the country. Lines formed, stamping presses roared, assembly workers filed stocks and fitted bolts. The United States was mobilizing for a global war, and the weapon that would quietly arm its vast and diverse forces had been born. No one at the time fully understood what they had created. The Garand would win the battles. The Thompson would storm the bunkers. The Bar would hold the lines. But the M1 Carbine would become something else entirely, something no other weapon in the war managed to be. It would become the rifle for everyone, the weapon of the common soldier, the sidekick of medics and tankers and engineers, the trusted companion of paratroopers, pathfinders, sailors, and supply convoys. 6 million would roll off American production lines, more than any other rifle of the war. And its journey had only just begun. When the first crates of M1 carbines left American docks in late 1942, the soldiers who received them did not yet understand that they were holding the most widely issued rifle of the entire war. They opened the wooden boxes expecting another heavy steel burden, another weapon that would slow them down during marches or snag against their gear. Instead, they found a rifle that barely felt like a rifle at all. Light in the hand, quick to shoulder, slim enough to tuck under an arm while climbing into a truck or crawling into a foxhole. Some men doubted anything that small could survive the brutal reality of combat. Others picked it up, cycled the action, and smiled. It felt right. The carbine's journey from prototype to frontline weapon was faster than anyone predicted. The United States was fighting across multiple theaters at once: North Africa, Guadalcanal, the Aleutians. Supply officers wanted weapons that could be issued to cooks, drivers, MPs, engineers, radio operators, and medics without slowing them down. The carbine filled that gap perfectly. It weighed barely over 5 pounds, less than half the weight of the Garand. It carried 15 rounds in a magazine that could be swapped in seconds. It fired as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger, and at short to medium range, its accuracy surprised even seasoned marksmen. When the first units reached North Africa in Operation Torch, the reactions were mixed but memorable. Tank crews loved it immediately. For months, they had struggled with trying to store full-length rifles inside cramped turrets. Every time they bailed out under fire, their rifles caught on hatches and straps. The carbine changed everything. It slipped into turret racks without trouble. It slid across a tanker's lap without interfering with controls. It was ready the moment a tanker hit the ground. Engineers discovered its value during bridge construction and demolition work. Unlike the heavy Garand, the carbine stayed out of the way while they handled cables, explosives, and equipment. When sudden firefights erupted along river crossings, the carbine gave them real firepower that a pistol could never match. Signal Corps troops carried it while stringing telephone wire under fire. Their hands needed freedom, their gear was fragile, and the carbine allowed them to defend themselves without sacrificing mobility. Medic corpsmen, perhaps more than anyone, embraced the carbine with gratitude. A medic's job required speed above all else. The Garand weighed down their packs and slowed their movements when they sprinted from casualty to casualty. The Thompson was too heavy and too expensive. Pistols left them helpless in extended firefights. The carbine became the perfect compromise. Many medics said it allowed them to choose when to fight and when to save lives, without being hindered by their own gear. The carbine's spread continued as American forces moved deeper into Tunisia. It appeared in supply convoys, along desert roads,
in the hands of truck drivers who had once been easy prey for sudden ambushes. It rode in jeeps across rugged hills. MPs used it at roadblocks and during prisoner escorts. Even chaplains were issued carbines in some units because the rifle was light enough to carry alongside their essential equipment. By mid-1943, the carbine had reached the Pacific in large numbers. There, its advantages became even more obvious. Jungle warfare punished soldiers carrying heavy rifles. The dense vegetation made long rifles awkward and slow. The humidity ruined gear. Long patrols drained strength. A rifle that weighed 5 pounds instead of 10 was a gift. Marines used the carbine while scouting through thick growth, often praising its balance and speed. Navy Seabees working on islands from Guadalcanal to Tarawa embraced it as the only weapon that fit their unpredictable days. 1 hour they were building airstrips, the next they were fighting off enemy snipers. But the carbine's real explosion in popularity came in Europe. When American troops landed in Italy and later in Normandy, the carbine accompanied them in staggering numbers. Infantry squads still carried Garands as their primary rifles, but everyone around them carried carbines. Platoon runners, mortar crews, bazooka teams, ammunition carriers, headquarters clerks, jeep chauffeurs, and artillery spotters all had them slung across their chests. No other weapon in the American arsenal spread this far, this fast, across this many roles. Soldiers praised its intuitive handling. The rifle came to the shoulder quickly during sudden firefights. Its recoil was light enough for even the most inexperienced soldier to fire rapidly and accurately under pressure. And above all, the carbine never felt in the way. It allowed soldiers to climb into trenches, squeeze through hedgerows, move across rubble, ride in half-tracks, and operate radios without constantly adjusting their weapon. In town after town across Sicily, Italy, and France, the carbine proved its worth. Soldiers reported using it effectively during close-quarter fights inside farmhouses. Scouts carried it during reconnaissance patrols, trusting its lightweight frame when they needed to move silently and quickly. At night, when visibility collapsed and distances shrank, the carbine became one of the most useful weapons in the American toolkit. The rifle spread beyond American hands as well. By late 1943, French resistance fighters were receiving them through airdrops. The British Special Operations Executive requested shipments. Even some Italian partisans used carbines against German occupation forces. The appeal was universal. It required almost no training to operate. It worked reliably. It weighed almost nothing. And in the chaos of war, those qualities meant survival. By the end of 1943, one fact had become undeniable. This was not a specialized rifle. It was not a niche weapon. It was the weapon every soldier could carry, every soldier could use, and every soldier could trust. And the demand for it was only growing. What began as a desperate search for a lightweight defensive weapon had become something far larger. The M1 Carbine was no longer simply filling a gap. It was reshaping the way America armed its military.
When American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne prepared for the great jumps of the war, they faced a problem no conventional infantryman ever had to think about. Every ounce of weight mattered. Every inch of length mattered. The moment they stepped out of the door of a C-47, gravity seized everything they carried. Rifles snagged on static lines. Barrels caught on parachute harnesses. Bulky weapons slammed against their bodies when the silk canopy yanked them upward. A cumbersome rifle could injure a paratrooper before he ever touched the ground. The Garand was too long. The Thompson too heavy. The BAR completely impossible. Paratroopers needed a weapon built for the sky, not just the ground. And that need turned the M1 Carbine into one of the most iconic paratrooper tools of the entire war. The standard carbine solved many problems already. It was light, compact, and quick to shoulder. But it was still awkward when strapped across a trooper's chest during a jump. Tank crews had turret racks. Engineers had trucks. Paratroopers had gravity. Their world was a violent tumble of wind, canvas, and straps. They needed something even more compact, something that could fold. Winchester and Inland Division answered with a redesign that would become legendary. They replaced the wooden stock with a steel wire frame attached to a hinge. The barrel remained the same, but the rifle could now collapse into a size small enough to sling tight across the torso. It was officially designated the M1 Carbine, the paratrooper model. The folding stock transformed the weapon into something entirely new. With the stock folded, the rifle tucked neatly against a trooper's body. It would not catch on lines or gear. The paratrooper could land, roll, rise, and snap the stock open in one clean movement. That fluidity meant survival in the dark chaos that came after landing behind enemy lines. The weapon was quick, elegant, and made for motion. Pathfinders, the men who jumped first to mark landing zones, fell in love with it instantly. Their missions demanded stealth and speed. They needed a weapon that could fire quickly without weighing them down during long night marches through unfamiliar terrain. The M1A1's light weight allowed them to run across fields in Normandy, dodge German patrols, and slip through hedgerows without the banging and clanging of a heavy rifle. When the beacons were set and the sky filled with hundreds of parachutes behind them, the carbine was the weapon they trusted to protect their positions. In Normandy, paratroopers of the 101st dropped into darkness, scattered across the French countryside. Many landed miles from their intended zones, tangled in trees, dropped into flooded fields, or fell among enemy positions. In that chaos, the carbine proved its worth. Troopers pulled themselves free from their chutes, flicked open the folding stock, slapped in a 15-round magazine, and moved. In the dim light of dawn, carbines crackled across hedgerows as small groups of paratroopers linked up and began fighting toward their objectives. The carbine's advantages did not stop with its portability. Its short range reduced stopping power in extreme cold. Its .30 carbine round was not as strong as the .30-06. The paratroopers still praised it because it did the one thing no other rifle of the era could do. It stayed out of their way until the very moment they needed it, and then it delivered. By 1944, photographs from every airborne operation told the story clearly. Helmet nets, jump jackets, bandoliers, and woven through the center of those images, the unmistakable outline of the M1A1 carbine's folded wire stock. A simple hinge and a few pounds of steel had created the most iconic airborne rifle of World War II. The carbine was not just a weapon the airborne used. It became part of their identity, a symbol of mobility, speed, and independence. A rifle built not for trenches or fixed lines, but for soldiers who dropped from the sky. Long before the M1 Carbine became a symbol of airborne troops, it had already woven itself into the daily life of thousands of American servicemen across every corner of the war. No other weapon of World War II slipped so effortlessly into so many roles. No rifle, no submachine gun, no pistol, no shotgun, not even the mighty Garand matched the carbine's reach. It was everywhere because it fit everywhere. It did not demand space. It did not demand strength. It did not demand special training. It simply worked, quietly and reliably, for soldiers whose jobs were as varied as the war itself. For tank crews, the carbine was nothing short of liberation. Inside the steel belly of a Sherman, space was measured in inches. Everything was cramped. Everything was hot. Everything was loud. Tankers carried tools, radios, spare parts, maps, ammo cans, and personal gear, all jammed into a machine designed around armor and firepower, not comfort. A rifle like the Garand was impossible to maneuver. Even the Thompson, despite its compact size, weighed so much that it slowed a tanker during emergency bailouts. When a tank was hit and the crew had seconds to escape, a weapon that snagged on a hatch or caught on webbing could be fatal. The carbine changed that instantly. Its small size allowed it to fit in turret racks or hang inside the hole without getting in the way. Tankers could grab it with one hand while climbing out of a burning vehicle. The rifle was fast enough to use while running for cover and light enough that a turret gunner could swing it out of the hatch before dropping to the ground. It gave armored crews a level of mobility and personal security they had never had before. Combat engineers found the carbine even more valuable. Their work required constant movement and dexterity. They carried satchel charges, Bangalore torpedoes, flamethrowers, axes, picks, wire cutters, and mine detectors. A heavy rifle would slow the entire team and make delicate operations clumsy and dangerous. The carbine solved every problem at once. Its weight barely registered on a soldier already laden with gear. Its compact frame allowed engineers to crawl under barbed wire or climb riverbanks while keeping the weapon at hand. When engineers breached obstacles under fire, the carbine gave them the ability to defend themselves without sacrificing speed. Its role in clearing roads, blowing bridges, and leading assaults made it a constant presence at the front. Seabees, the Navy's construction battalions, embraced the carbine as if it had been designed specifically for them. They worked under some of the harshest and most unpredictable conditions of the war. One day they were pouring concrete and laying runways. The next day they were under sniper fire while building docks. The carbine rode slung over their shoulders while they hauled lumber, set steel pilings, or operated bulldozers. It was always ready, always close, always light. The Seabees respected practical tools above all else, and the carbine quickly earned that respect. In the Pacific, the carbine became the choice weapon for Navy shore parties and landing crews. When Marines pushed inland, these men unloaded supplies, established beachheads, guided tanks onto the sand, and braved incoming mortar fire. They needed a weapon that allowed them to work with both hands, but still react to danger instantly. The carbine's small size and ease of use made it ideal for the unpredictable chaos of amphibious operations. Medical corpsmen continued relying on the carbine throughout the war. Every medic understood the importance of being light on their feet. A heavy rifle reduced their ability to reach the wounded. But medics also knew that the Geneva protections they expected on paper meant little on the battlefield. Japanese forces often targeted medics deliberately. German patrols sometimes mistook them for armed soldiers. The carbine gave medics a weapon they could carry without encumbering their life-saving work. Many credited it with saving not only their patients' lives, but their own. Signal Corps units, often operating near the front to maintain communication lines, use the carbine constantly. When laying wire through towns, over hills, or across open fields, they carried bulky reels and delicate equipment. The Garand would get caught on the spools. The Thompson was too heavy. The carbine could be slung across a shoulder and forgotten until needed. The carbine also became the natural weapon for military police. MPs guarded roads, handled thousands of prisoners, directed traffic under shell fire, and patrolled newly captured towns. The carbine gave them authority without weighing them down during long hours of checkpoint duty. It became a part of their silhouette as recognizable as their white helmets. Officers in every branch adopted the carbine with enthusiasm. Commanders needed to move, point, signal, run, and shout. They could not do that easily with a heavy rifle in hand. Many officers considered the pistol insufficient for real combat, especially in Europe where close-quarters engagements inside towns were common. The carbine filled the gap perfectly. Light enough to carry in one hand, accurate enough to fight with, and fast enough to respond to sudden attacks. Even the Office of Strategic Services found the carbine indispensable. OSS teams behind enemy lines valued silent movement and quick reactions. They couldn't afford the noise of a clattering rifle. The carbine rode quietly against their chests as they infiltrated towns in France, sabotaged rail lines in Italy, and trained resistance fighters throughout Europe. Resistance groups themselves loved the carbine. It was intuitive, reliable, and accurate enough for guerrilla warfare. What emerged across every front was a simple truth. The M1 Carbine was not a specialist weapon. It was not designed for a single type of soldier or a single type of fight. It was a universal solution for the chaos and variety of war. A medical officer could carry it, a tanker could carry it, a radio man could carry it, a Seabee could carry it, a pilot shot down behind enemy lines could carry it, a partisan fighting in the woods of Yugoslavia could carry it. The carbine fit them all. By 1944, it had become impossible to walk through an American camp without seeing dozens of them slung over shoulders and leaning against crates. Every road march, every supply depot, Every airfield, every dock, every landing zone, the carbine was there, quiet, reliable, and ready. It had become the rifle of the modern army. Not the weapon that won glory and heroic charges, but the weapon that held an entire war machine together. A rifle for the soldiers who built, healed, carried, guided, repaired, and supplied the fight. A rifle for those who kept the vast American war effort running. By the spring of 1945, as American troops pushed across Germany and island after island fell in the Pacific, the M1 Carbine had already become something far greater than the weapon the Ordnance Department originally imagined. It was no longer simply a lightweight defensive gun meant for drivers and signalmen. It had transformed into the most widely carried rifle of the United States military, a weapon that crossed branches, ranks, and continents. 6 million carbines would be produced before the war ended, more than every Garand, Thompson, BAR, and Springfield combined. It had become, quite literally, the rifle that armed everyone. But the true legacy of the carbine did not emerge only in factories or supply warehouses. It emerged in the memories of the men who carried it. A young radioman in France remembered sprinting between hedgerows with the carbine pressed against his chest, thankful it did not weigh him down when German mortars crashed nearby. A medic in the Philippines recalled reaching wounded Marines in seconds precisely because the carbine stayed out of his way instead of dragging him back. A Sherman tank gunner said the carbine was the only weapon he trusted to grab while bailing out of a burning tank because he could draw it instantly while running through smoke and shrapnel. Everywhere the stories repeated themselves. The carbine was not perfect, but it was always there, always ready, always manageable, always familiar. The war's final months displayed the carbine's flexibility on a scale few could have predicted. In Germany, newly liberated prisoners carried carbines as they guided Allied patrols through camps. Military government units used them while securing towns, protecting civilians, and maintaining order. MPs guarding bridges along the Rhine slung carbines over their white helmets as convoys rolled past. Pilots rescued after crash landings in enemy territory held carbines as they waited for pickup teams. Behind them, depot workers cleaned and reissued thousands more to soldiers rotating toward the Pacific. It seemed as if no matter where the war moved, the carbine followed. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, millions of American servicemen returned home. Many carried vivid memories of the little rifle that had accompanied them farther than any other weapon. The carbine's legacy continued long after the last shots of World War II were fired. Countries shattered by the war relied on American weapons to rebuild their armies and police forces, and the carbine became one of the most recognizable rifles of the New World. France armed its colonial and European forces with them. South Korea used carbines extensively during the Korean War. The Philippines and Thailand fielded them for decades. Taiwan's armed forces adopted them in large numbers. West German police units carried them during the tense early years of the Cold War. Guerrilla fighters in Greece, resistance groups in Eastern Europe, and covert operations teams across Asia wielded the carbine as both a weapon and a symbol of American support. In Vietnam, South Vietnamese soldiers carried carbines on jungle patrols years before the arrival of the M16. In some villages, the carbine was the first firearm many villagers had ever seen in the hands of trained soldiers. But its most meaningful legacy may have remained with the ordinary Americans who never considered themselves warriors. Engineers, medics, sailors, drivers, clerks, radio operators, Seabees, pilots, mechanics, MPs. The carbine was their rifle, the one that matched their tasks instead of complicating them. It was the tool that let them run toward the wounded, or fix a broken bridge, or climb out of a tank turret, or carry a radio through muddy fields. The Garand won the heavy battles, but the carbine won the battles fought in the margins, the moments when survival depended on speed, lightness, and simplicity. Modern historians sometimes call the M1 Carbine the first truly modern personal defense weapon, a lightweight rifle designed for mobility instead of raw power, a weapon that recognized the changing shape of war, where not every soldier fought in a trench and not every soldier carried a heavy rifle. In many ways, the carbine anticipated the future. Decades later, armies around the world would adopt compact rifles, carbines, and PDWs that borrowed directly from the carbine's philosophy. No other World War II weapon feels as familiar to the eyes of a modern soldier. By the time the war ended, the carbine had become more than a rifle. It had become a symbol of a new kind of army. An army built on movement, coordination, communication, engineering, logistics, and speed. An army made not only of riflemen, but of every man who supported them. The carbine armed the mechanics who kept the tanks running, the medics who kept men alive, the signalmen who connected the battlefield, the MPs who kept convoys moving, and the officers who led them all. It armed airborne pathfinders dropping through darkness. It armed tankers climbing through hatches. It armed Seabees carving runways out of coral and rock. It armed partisans fighting in forests and towns. It armed the vast machinery of a global war. In photographs taken across continents, from the sands of North Africa to the jungles of Guadalcanal, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the ruins of Cologne, the carbine appears again and again. Not always in the center of the frame, not always in the hands of a hero, but always present. The quiet rifle of the ordinary soldier, the rifle carried not by one kind of man, but by every kind of man. The M1 Carbine never claimed the spotlight. It never sought glory, but it did something far more important. It became the weapon that held the American war effort together, the weapon that armed everyone,